Alright, today I'm going to be doing some work on the H2 here. I'm having problems with a carburetor flooding. Took the carbs off and cleaned them, and I figured out it's not my carburetor, it's actually my Petcock. So even in the run position, it's a vacuum fed Petcock, so it shouldn't be having any fuel come out. I've got fuel coming out of here all the time. I went ahead and rebuilt the Petcock, and I'm still leaking a little bit. Done a little bit of troubleshooting with a couple of people online. Jess at jessbikes.com has helped out immensely. I've got a rebuild kit from him. I had another rebuild kit that I tried before that just to make sure it wasn't just a bad rebuild kit. Between sending some pictures back and forth to him and talking on the phone, I think I've got a bad valve body or something's wrong with the valve body. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how to rebuild this Petcock because there's no other Petcock for triple on mine that I could find out of all the videos I searched. Can't even find the picture of the inside of this particular valve body. So I'm going to go ahead and do a video on it, how to take it apart, how to rebuild it, and where to buy the parts at. Now I've got an air box up in here, so I'm normally running the factory air box. I've got these just slip-on carb covers just when I'm tuning or playing around with it. So basically I'm going to take this one off. I've already got it unscrewed. I've already drained all the fuel out of my Petcock, but if you haven't, get some lines, run them down to a gas can, drain all the fuel out of your tank so your tank's empty. There'll still be a little bit in the bottom of your bowl here, and there might be a little bit in the tank, so keep a little bucket underneath the drip. That way you don't run gas all over, and you probably get a little bit on your engine, so make sure you have a rag to clean up your mess. Now if you've not removed one of these before, as you turn the nut here off of the tank, lefty-loosey, it actually tightens up on top of the valve body. So it's going down the valve body and up on the tank. So once you break this loose, the valve body will actually start spinning. If you hold the valve body in place, you can unscrew it and it'll come off. Up inside of here is a long tube with a filter on top, and there's a short filter on top. Now I'll show you a few components that are inside of here. The kit that I got from Jess Bikes has the filters that go up inside of the tank onto the tubes. It also has a new screen for the bottom. This is out of an old Petcock. So basically you've got your tank seal, you got your bottom bowl seal. This is actually what controls the actuator. So these are the basic components. You've got a tank seal, you've got a bowl seal, you've got the lever seal. You've got this little guy here. I still don't know what that one's for, but basically when I show you, it's on the inside of the valve body. I'll show you where it goes. You've got the diaphragm with an O-ring on the end of it. You've got 5 screws on the diaphragm and 2 screws on the lever. Now, if you need screws, you can get it from Jess Bikes, Z1 Enterprise, somewhere like that. But if you're in a pinch and you need them, I went over to Lowe's just so I'd have some backups in case I stripped one of them off. You can get the 3mm that fit the lever and the 4mm that fit the valve body. You can also get screws, or not screws, I'm sorry, washers over there. I also got some hose clamps. These little ringed hose clamps. They're a little bit tighter than what I've had on there. I don't like using old screw clamps. These were what was on the bike to start with. These aren't too bad. So when I go to put the fuel lines back on, I'll decide which one's better. Inspect your fuel lines while you've got them off. Make sure there's no cracks in them. Mine are in pretty good shape. My vent tube's still pretty soft and rubbery. These are a little bit harder and dry, but there's no cracks in them, so I'm going to reuse those. Here's what it looks like off the bike. You've got the 2 screens here. If you don't have 2 screens, you need to check your tank and make sure one of them didn't fall off in the tank. It may not have had one in the first place. So saying when you put this on the bike, if you're tightening this or loosening it, if you're tightening it on the bike, you'll notice it goes down on the valve body and vice versa. So when you're going to put this back on the bike to tighten it up, make sure you've got it threaded up, not all the way to where it falls off, but 2 or 3 threads down. So when you're tightening it up, it'll actually tighten up without hitting the valve body, and then you're gonna have to turn the whole valve body around to get it to work. Okay, so these just pop on and off. You just slide them off of there. I've already changed them again. I'll show you the kit. I'll make sure I put a link in the description below to where I got the kit at. Inside of here, once you take this off, you'll see there's an O-ring in here, which comes in your kit. That's to seal it up against the tank. I'm just going to push it down in there, not tearing it. Okay, on the bottom, This is a 10 millimeter. Put it on the right way. I'm going to loosen this up. This still may have gas in it. Shouldn't have, but it may have a little drip or two in it. So make sure you put over top of something that if it drips, it doesn't run all over you or all over your table or whatever you're working on. Now this, if you haven't had it out of the bike for a while, you need to clean that out anyhow, because a lot of times this is where a lot of debris builds up. So you get little pieces of rust, crusts, chunks of whatever floating in here. So up inside here, that's the screen that keeps all the big chunks from going in there. That's the seal that actually seals the bottom part to it. That's the screen to keep all the big chunks from getting sucked up through there. So once you take that apart, either clean your screen, make sure it's not damaged, put the new screen in, whichever you have. Make sure it seats in there all the way. Take your new seal, put it down in there. Make sure it sits flat. If you need to, take a little screwdriver and set it. Careful not to tear it when you're pushing it in. So once you get that seated down in there, take your fingernail, make sure you don't tear it. Once it's seated in there properly, take your bottom cap, tighten it back up. This does not have to be cranked on. The rubber seal will seat it. You just want it tight enough it doesn't, vibrate off of there. I'm going to go till it's snug and about a quarter of a turn past that. That's it. Okay, so that takes care of the bottom screen, the bottom gasket. Okay, we're going to take the diaphragm out now. So before you take the screws out, if you notice where the vacuum tube is, the little plastic insert here has a little tab on it. Make sure that gets lined back up with this. And it will line up with the hole. It's kind of hard to see on the back of the valve body here, but there's a hole back here, so those are going to line up when it's all done. So to do this, we're just going to take the 5 screws out of the front of it. I'm going to take them off back and forth. There's a spring behind there if you haven't taken those off before. I want it to pressure off the spring evenly, and we're going to tighten it up the same way so we don't damage the new diaphragm gasket if you're putting one in. I'm just going to take these 2 out because it's easier for me. And then the other 3 I'll loosen up as I go. Like I said, I've already done this a couple times trying to fix my little small leak. I thought at first I might have pinched or tore my little 4-way gasket, but after some diagnosing, when I pushed in on the diaphragm from the other side and seated the O-ring with a clamp, the fuel leak stopped. So I'm pretty sure my problem's in my body here. And for whatever reason, it's not sealing. The O-ring's not touching the hole in the back of here and sealing it. So once I've got these all loosened up a little bit, take them out by hand the rest of the way, like so. Now again, when you take this off, there's a spring behind here, so don't lose your spring. So there's a spring behind there. That's the little hole I was telling you about. We're going to line up with this little plastic insert. The spring comes off. If your spring is damaged, replace it. Diaphragm comes out. There should be an O-ring on it. On your body itself, you'll have a little small gasket here, and this is where the diaphragm sits into. So what's happening with me is if I take this, put it on the bike, put it in, and actually push it down and close it, my valve body seals and fuel stops running, which means I'm not seating this O-ring up against this back part. Now, it's hard to see in there with the camera angle, but I've gone through and I've cleaned this out super well. I don't have a bead blast or anything like that, so I can't actually get in there and bead blast it. But I don't see any missing chunks. There's no debris missing. There's nothing on there that would tell me that it would cause it to leak. So basically, I'm going to put it back together one more time. I'm going to clean it up a little bit better. And if I still got a leak, I'm going to get a new valve body. Now, if you're changing your diaphragm, this gasket just folds over and pushes right through. So that's how you get that out. Make sure everything's cleaned up. There's a little concave part on here. The concave part should go up against the concave part on that side to actually make a place for the vacuum to be created. So it makes like a little bubble. I'm trying to think what like a bellow inside of there. So you create a little vacuum bubble. What that does is that pushes the spring pushes in this way normally to keep the gas from running. Once you start the bike, the vacuum pulls it open, pulls this back away from the valve body, and lets fuel run through it. So spring's on. Once the vacuum's created, pulls this back, gas flows freely. So to put this back together, taking my diaphragm, folding over it. Be careful not to tear it. If you're replacing the old one, they're usually pretty dry rotted, so if you're going to try to fix something in here, just go ahead and buy a kit and be done with it. I'm going to feed it through. Make sure I don't tear it. I'll kind of fold it up as I go in. And it pops out on the other side. Now there's a hole in the gasket. And there's a hole in the plastic. That's back to where our tubing is, so we want to make sure we spin it around so the hole lines up properly. So what I want to do now, again, I've got the inside of my valve body as clean as I can get it. I'm going to take my little flat washer. I'm going to put it in place. And this doesn't fit in there super good, so once you tighten the diaphragm together, it kind of presses in and seats in place better. Just make sure you've got it inside of the little grooves there, so it actually sits in place, because you don't want it falling out or smashing or blocking the hole in the middle. All right, so now I need to put my diaphragm in place. So basically, make sure your hole in your diaphragm is lined up with the hole in the plastic, which again should be a little mark on there. If that's not lined up, the vacuum can't pull it open. So basically, the air pulls through here, but it can't pull here because this side's sealed, so it puts pressure on the spring to cause the spring to open. And again, it's not a whole lot of room in there. You can't really tell it's moving, but there's enough in there between this part and this part to actually create a vacuum to draw this piece back in to where it belongs. So once I get my hole lined up, I'm going to find my hole here. Again, that piece gets lined up with that. So I know it goes on that way. It drops in place. It feels like it seats. After that, I'll take my spring. I'll take my back side of my diaphragm. Again, make sure you line up the spring in the seat. If you need to, you can put the seat in the spring first, like that. It's easier for you to see. On top of the pin. And again, the tube gets lined up with the plastic piece, which gets lined up with the holes. Make sure nothing moves. All my holes are lined up. Make sure you didn't pinch the diaphragm in there anywhere. If you did, take it apart when you do it. If you need to change your screws, change them. And again, these you want to tighten evenly so you don't bend the spring sideways and you don't pinch the gasket. I'm just using my finger to put some pressure on it so I don't have to try to hold it together while I'm screwing them all down. I'm going to do this the same way as I did when I took it apart. I'm going to put 3 of them in there. Take this little micro driver because it's easier for me to hold and just run them in. Not tighten them with it, I'm just running them down. And then once I get these snug, I'll put the other 2 in, and then we'll tighten it up. And that's my old washer, by the way. Okay. And again, these, since the diaphragm's in there actually making the seal, you want to tighten these, but you don't want to crank them tight. They don't need to be over tightened. And again, go back and forth like you were tightening a tire. Go crisscross back and forth. Again, it doesn't have to be super tight, just has to be tight enough they don't vibrate loose. Don't put any thread lock on, because if you got to get it back out, you're going to do some damage probably. Okay, so that's the diaphragm. Last thing we have to do is the valve. So the valve lever is pretty simple. 2 screws in here. This will be the same thing. This isn't really spring loaded, but there's that 4 valve gasket behind there. So this is behind it. And that's just going to put a little more pressure on there. And there's also a spring O-ring underneath here. So you want to take this off evenly until it comes loose. You'll feel it when it gets loose. Like right there, it's now, there's no pressure on it anymore. So once you get this out, it's hard to put this in backwards because the valve's only going to fit, or the lever's only going to fit one way. Your on is to the top, your reserve's to the left, your off's at the bottom. Here's the little washer I was telling you about. This basically just puts a little pressure on there to keep it from vibrating off. But it also doesn't make it tight to where you can't actually turn this lever back and forth. Once you pull this off, check the bottom of it. As you can see, I've already cleaned mine up. It was covered with a bunch of stuff. So any type of sediment or anything on here will actually have potential to push these down or flatten these out, and you'll leak gas between one chamber and the other. And then if you're in the run position, it may be leaking gas through the prime, and you may actually get gas dumping out of the carburetor, which is not good. To remove this, just hook it into the middle, pop it out of there. Again, clean all your debris out. When you're going to replace it, just make sure when you put it back in, inspect it for any type of damage. Again, this one's a new one, so I'm not worried about that. I didn't damage it taking it back out. And same as the bottom ring and the fuel ring for the tank. Just make sure you actually seat these. Don't just put it in there and tighten it up. These 4 little holes have to go around those 4 little tubes. So you got to play with it just a little bit just to get it to set where it's supposed to set. So now I have that seated in there. As you can see, it's all the way down around each metal tube. Some people recommend putting nothing on here. Some people put a little gas in there. Have people recommend 3-in-1 oil. Me, I'm just going to put a little 2-stroke oil in there. Just in case it does get sucked through, it's just going to burn it off. You don't want to saturate it. I just want to lubricate it enough that the first few turns, it doesn't rip a hole in it. So again, it's not saturated. It's just enough to make a little bit of slickness there, lubrication. So I'm gonna drop that back on. Drop my spring washer back in. I'm not sure what that's technically called, but I'm gonna call it a spring washer for now. I'm sure somebody will correct me with the proper term. Make sure I got my reserve to the side, my ons to the top, primes at the bottom. I'll line this up, and again, this is like the diaphragm. When you tighten this up, you want to tighten it up evenly. You don't want to pinch one side. It's going to leave a gap with that washer underneath of it. So basically, I'm going to just run these until they're snug. Same thing on this one. And I'm doing the same thing I did on the diaphragm. I'm actually putting pressure on this with my thumb, so I'm not going to get a gap or an uneven tightening off of it. I'm just running them until they're snug. I'll take my screwdriver and tighten them the rest of the way. And again, back and forth on the screws. We'll go on that one. That one. And there. Now your valve should turn smoothly. Shouldn't feel anything weird in there. Shouldn't have any problems with it from there. So the last thing would be to replace the gasket that goes up against the fuel tank. I showed you that first. Make sure your screens are in. Make sure the screen's on the top. I had a little problems with this one. The brass tubing, probably 50 years old. The new screen that I got would not fit perfectly. So I took a little bit of Teflon tape and just wrapped it around basically just to make a little bit of a bevel to make sure that fit tight and it didn't fall off when I go to put it up in the tank. It's nothing more frustrating than putting this up in the tank and it slides down a little bit, and next thing you knock your screen off, and then you're taking the tank off to get the screen out of it. So the screens are on, diaphragm's in, line back up with a vacuum tube, bowl's cleaned out, everything should be replaced, should be good to go. I'm going to put this back on, see if I'm still leaking gas. If I'm still leaking gas out of here, I know my body's shot because I've gone through this multiple times, double checking everything. And as soon as I get a new valve body in, I'll do another video on it. All right, back on the bike, and I'm still leaking fuel. So basically I'm only leaking out of the #1 carb outlet. But again, when I took the diaphragm off originally, I took a clamp, pushed the diaphragm so it's seated properly in the valve body, and the fuel stopped flowing. So I'm pretty sure I've got a bad valve body. One other thing I did do, on the vacuum side, I've got a vacuum hand pump like you pump oil at a mower or something with, like a siphon, hand siphon. When I put the hand siphon on the vacuum side and pumped it, gas flows out of everything, so I know the diaphragm's actually opening. Again, I just don't think it's seating properly.